Today, we will be talking about a normal war. That's right. If you know anything about the War of the Bucket, you would say, no, that was a really stupid war, at which I would have agreed, until I learned the truth. The War of the Bucket is commonly misconceived as a war started over a bucket. Pretty self-explanatory, it's right there in the name. However, the cause of the war was something much more conceivable. We'll get into that after a little background. From the late Middle Ages until the Renaissance, the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope were at each other's necks about who should have control. The Pope had the power to crown new emperors as he felt necessary, while the Emperor had a lot of influence over the Pope. At the time, Italy was a federation made up of hundreds of counties, duchies, bishoprics, and more, meaning neither the emperor nor the pope had any sort of complete control. Due to this, these smaller provinces could choose if they sided with the pope as Guelphs or supported the emperor as Ghibellines. Among these smaller counties and duchies were two neighboring cities who found themselves at opposite ends of the political divide. These cities were called Bologna, whose allegiance was to the Pope, and Modena, who was loyal to the Holy Roman Emperor. A previous history of border clashes and day raids only added to their disagreements. These disagreements quickly turned to war when in 1325 the Bolognese laid waste to some Modenese farmland. That was the last straw for Passerino del Buonaccorsi, the ruler of Modena. The Bolognese had two strategically placed forts protecting their city in the southwest, Monteveglio and Zappolino. Passerino decided to bring an army down and lay siege to Monteveglio. Luckily for them, the commander of Monteveglio was a secret Ghibelline, and quickly switched allegiances and handed over the fort without bloodshed. With this, the Bolognese declared war. Not because some sneaky Modenese had slipped into town and stolen their bucket, as common misconception states, but rather because they hated the Modenese, supported a different political leader, and wanted to get their fort back. So Bologna, feeling pretty confident, marched west with an army of about 32,000 to meet the 7,000 strong of the Modenese. They sent half their force to lay siege on Monteveglio, and the other half to spread out along the river to prevent the Modenese from crossing. Because of the enormity of the opposition's army, the Modenese could not simply push through. It was big brain time. They faked an attack up in the north to draw the bulk of the Bolognese defenses up, then quickly moved down south where they crossed the river. When the Bolognese saw the Modenese get across, they most likely expected them to try and break their siege at Monteveglio. However, they did the opposite and went to attack the second fort, Zappolino. The Bolognese knew that losing both forts would leave their capital defenseless, so they sent their entire force to face the Modenese at Zappolino. By that time, it was late in the day, a time when medieval armies would typically set up camp and prepare to battle the next day. But the Modenese, seeing as they had a much smaller force, figured to attack the Bolognese while they were still scrambling to get organized. As the battle raged, the sneaky Modenese pulled one of the most predictable, yet surprisingly effective tactic in medieval warfare. They sent a group of cavalry to go around and attack from behind. The surprised Bolognese were pinned and slowly beaten down until what was left of the army fled, or were chased, if you please, back to the capital. After their victory, the Modenese took themselves on a scenic tour around the Bolognese countryside, pillaging and burning as they went until they reached the capital, where they essentially held a massive rave right outside the city walls for 3 days, while the disgruntled Bolognese could only sit back and watch. After the party ended and the Modenese began to pack up and head home, some Modenese soldiers thought it would be funny to take the Bolognese well bucket as a war trophy. And so, the Modenese stole Bologna's bucket and put it up on display at their cathedral, eventually moving it to their city hall, where it has remained on display to this day. A few months later, the two cities made a peace agreement in which the Bolognese paid the Modenese heavy war reparations, and in exchange, all captured properties would be returned, excluding the bucket. In the end, Modena suffered 500 casualties, while Bologna lost 2,500, and the two cities would have relative peace while the rest of northern Italy crashed and burned around them.